Hello, and thank you for taking the time to watch my review of this Vortex scope. It happens to be the Venom 3 to 15 by 44 first focal plane scope. Before we look in detail at this, we are going to deal with what comes in the box. And it's first thing is the manual for your reticle, right there, the EBR-7c MOA reticle. We have the instruction manual for the scope itself, in this case, again, D3 to 15 by 44, a very fine microfiber Vortex logoed lens cloth. We have our sunshade, which screws into the front for those of you who have to deal with glare. It has also got some serrations on there to help minimize that internal reflection, so it's nice. We have our rotational stop ring right there, and I'll show you how that works when I do the more detailed look at the turrets. And then we have our little Allen key tool, which is a 2mm. In case you lose it, you'll be able to replace it with just a standard 2mm Allen. That is used for installing or removing your throw lever. It is used for resetting the zero on our windage turret, and the back of it with a little coin shape allows you to loosen your elevation turret. So a nice little multi-tool. You can throw that in your toolbox and use it when you need it. We're going to settle that aside over here for a minute, and we're going to pick up this box and have a peek at the back of it so we can read some of the, get that in there for you. Those are the details. I'm going to go ahead and read through the pertinent ones, which is the weight at 28.8 ounces. We're getting 29.2, but that is also because we already have about a half an ounce of weight added to it for the throw lever. So that is right in line with the manufacturer's stated weight. Our total length is going to be 13.3 inches from front to rear. Our tube size on the main tube is going to be 34mm. Our field of view at 100 yards is going to be 42 feet at the 3 power and 8.4 feet at the maximum 15 power. And our eye relief is going to be 3.7 inches. It also gives us the other details about our total range of travel for our elevation turret. Is going to be 124 MOA, 75 MOA on the windage turret, and when you have the zero stop ring installed, your elevation is going to be limited to 47 MOA, which is essentially 2 full rotations of the turret. That is when the zero stop is installed. I don't know that there's any other details we need to get off the back of there. I will have a slide after this that's going to have all that same information if you want to take a moment and pause the video and check that out. But as for the closer look at the scope, we're going to start here at the rear with our rear eyepiece and its adjustability. Get it bottomed out there. And I will say that it has very aggressive grooves on here, which is good because the tension on this thing is significant. It's not crazy tight, but it is definitely going to resist accidental adjustment, when you're carrying this thing around. So we got it maxed out. Go in about a quarter-ish turn, give it a little wiggle, see if we feel any movement. And if there is, it is just the slightest amount. I'm going to go ahead and say that that is basically no movement, which is good. So I'm going to go ahead and turn that back down to about the right place for me, because I have to adjust that whenever I go to use it. And we'll move forward to our magnification ring, which I have previously installed the throw lever, because this, like this, is quite tight. The magnification is not as tight as the eyepiece, but it is also heavily damped to adjust or to resist accidental adjustment. But the throw lever makes overcoming that resistance pretty simple. And as far as our range of throw, when we have the 3 at the 12 o'clock position, when we roll over to the bottom of the scope, we see that the 15 is almost exactly or basically exactly 180 degrees around the other side. So you're going to get 1/2 a rotation, 180 degrees from minimum to maximum. And if you're so inclined not to use the thread lever, there is some pretty good grooves on here. They're nice and deep, have a good edge to them, so you can get your fingers on there, make your adjustment. But just be aware that this is pretty tight. Moving forward from there, we're going to get a good look at our finish on our 34mm main tube, and then our larger front eyepiece, or bell, excuse me. And the finish overall, I've looked at it obviously before I got on camera, and aside from some little marks that I've accidentally put on there when I tested some rings, the finish is very uniform, very even. I don't see any spots where it looks like the finish is thin or splotchy, so they've done a good job. It is a little smoother, it is a little bit more glossy, so if you like a flatter, more matte, non-reflective finish, this is probably not exactly what you're going to be looking for, though the finish is actually pretty nice. Next, we're going to go move this out of the way a little bit. We're going to go over here to our windage turret. Get that cap off of there, which also has those same kind of deep grooves in there, nice sharp edges on them to give you a good bite. And underneath that, we see a fairly tall turret for a windage turret that's capped. You can see here in the middle we have our screw that you can remove in order to reset your windage. It is marked for our 1/4 MOA per click. And overall the turret feels nice. I like it. It's got nice sharp grooves here on the edge so you can make your adjustments. And then obviously when you're done, you're going to put your cap back on. I don't see an O-ring either on the cap or on the turret, so I suspect that there's O-rings underneath it to keep the elements out if you needed to pull that off to make an adjustment when it was raining or something like that. On the top we have our elevation turret, obviously, which with the use of this tool you can remove this cap, and that's going to let you reset the turret to 0 and install that rev stop, 0 stop ring. But I'm not going to do that right now because we are going to take a closer look at that in a minute. What it does have is pretty darn nice grooves. If you grab a hold of that thing, you're not going to be slipping on it. It's already kind of chewed my finger up a little bit, it looks like. I'm just playing with it, fiddling around. But it's a nice large turret. It's not super tall in the realm of, tactical style turrets, but it is pretty tall. I don't think it's crazy tall, but it's a good size. It's definitely got enough room to give you good clean clicks as you're going around that dial. And it is marked for your first revolution and your second revolution. Then over here on the left side of the scope we have our parallax dial. And as it stated on the box, it's from 10 down here to minimum and goes up to infinity, but the 100-yard line is at about the 270 degrees of rotation, so the vast majority of our adjustment is going to be underneath that 100-yard line. So that gives me the impression that they intended this scope for things like air rifles and rimfire rifles, where you're going to be wanting that very fine adjustment for your focus when you're shooting at small targets at those sorts of closer distances that rimfire and air rifles are usually going to be used at. And then when you get above the 100, you have another maybe 40 degrees of rotation before you hit the stop at infinity. So we're going to be able to check that out in the field and see if that's going to hinder our ability to find a good focus on those longer distance targets, because I feel like with a 15 power maximum, 800 or even 1,000 yards should be practical with this sort of a scope. So we're going to want to see if we're able to get that adjusted and have a nice clear image. but we won't know until we get out there and try it. And aside from taking a quick peek at the front lens, and we can see our threads in there for our sunshade, and that our lens is set back in there rather nicely, so it's not going to be accidentally bumped if you happen to strike the front of your scope against something. It's going to be nice and protected back in there, which is good. What else? Let's see on the bottom there. Made in China. I know that may be an issue for some people, and if you don't like Chinese made optics, this one is not going to be for you. But I think we've covered everything we need to here at this initial look, and we'll go ahead and move on to looking at our reticle and then the turrets before we take it out in the field and start looking at some targets at long distance. I've got it set up now to look at our EBR-7c MOA reticle in this Vortex Venom scope. Currently sitting at the minimum 3 power. We can see that it's a very small reticle at this magnification, and the finer elements of it are going to be unusable. But as we go through our magnification range, we're going to get a better look at that. I'm going to stop here for a moment at the 10 power, where I believe that the reticle has gotten large enough where we would be able to use all of the elements of it if we chose to. Even the fine dot matrix down there below the center. And then finally we're here at the maximum 15 power. You can see that the image is not exactly as sharp as you would expect, and that is because the eye relief has changed ever so slightly. If I just go ahead and remember which way I got to turn this thing to focus it. There I have it back in focus, where we can make out all of the fine detail in our dot matrix and all of the fine hash marks on our stadia lines. And overall we have quite a busy reticle in this scope. And I'm just going to call out some of the finer details. On the stadia lines, we see those very fine hash marks out there towards the ends. Those are going to be 1/2 MOA per hash mark, starting out beyond the 12 MOA line. And then from the center out to the 12, we have the marked 4 MOA, we have the slightly smaller 2 MOA hash marks, and then in between those we have just the 1 MOA hash marks that lift up above the horizontal stadia. And on the vertical stadia, that being the 12 and the 9, we see we have those 3 different size hash marks that are for the 1 MOA, 2 MOA, and 4 MOA, with the 4 MOAs being the ones that are actually labeled. So I'm going to give it just a minute here so you guys can have a look at this. If you're looking for a dot Christmas tree type reticle like this, you are going to be given a lot of information to work with so that you can do either dial and hold for wind or hold for both wind and elevation down there in our MOA grid. Anyway, I think that is a good look at this reticle, and we'll go ahead and take a look at the turrets. I have this repositioned now to look at the elevation turret. And the first thing I'm going to do is give it a little spin and be quiet so you all can hear it. There we go. Now I am going to remove our top cap with the supplied tool so that I can, one, show you the hardware inside, but also install the zero stop. The one thing we will see on that cap is a very fine, not a very fine, but a very nice O-ring. Can keep some of the moisture and elements out. We'll set that aside for now. And when we lift our turret off, like we would do if we were going to reset the zero, there are a fine set of splines on the inside of the turret that align with the splines on this erector. And then on this side over here, you see this little nub. There's also one on the inside of our turret. And what those do is set in the grooves on our zero stop ring. So when you're going to put this on, set it over this O-ring here, and it's going to kind of put some tension on it. And then you see it says rotate to stop. So this is pretty self-explanatory. You'll rotate it until the machined groove, a little slot, is going to come up and stop against our pin. And then you will put your cap on, setting your zero back where you need it to be. And you have to give it just a little bit of wiggle and it will drop in, and that pin on the inside of that will be set inside the groove on the top side of the ring. Now we've got that cap resecured. We're going to go ahead and test that 47 MOA of adjustment. But first, I want to show you that it does actually dial below zero. 4 1/4 MOA. So it's going to give you a little bit of ability to dial under. And there's not a way to set the turret that's not going to be able to be done, because those two pins are what are controlling your actual hard stop. But we'll go ahead and go up. There's 1 full rotation, and you can see that that zero actually lines up pretty well again. And we're going to watch as we go past 30 to 40. There's the 47, and with 1 extra quarter MOA, we can go just past it. But that is your 47 MOA of adjustment when your zero stop ring is installed. And if you thought you wanted to listen to some more clicks, well, you get to listen to plenty of them now as I return to zero. And that is how our elevation turret works. So I will go ahead and move the camera so that we can look at the windage turret. I have us repositioned now to look at our windage turret. I'll go ahead and get this cap off. Set that out of the way. And we can see that we have marks going in both the left and right direction. On the back side of that, we see that it's going to give us 12 MOA before we get back around to the opposite side, which way you will be dialing down through. You'll just have to remember that if you are making adjustments, so that you're not getting confused or lost in where the dial is telling you. But I'm going to go ahead and be quiet for a second and just dial around with this and let you listen to it. So that dial's got a little bit more play in it than the elevation dial did, as you can see there. It's not quite as crisp, but I actually think it might be just a touch louder in those individual detents. But overall, for a turret that you're going to be running capped the vast majority of the time, I think it is a completely adequate dial. I do like the sharp grooves that they have on here. Like going to give your fingers a good purchase for making those adjustments. But as with the elevation dial, this one is resettable. We have a very small conical shaped screw. I would prefer that actually to be a larger thread than that. That's pretty fine. At which point you can take off your cap, and it has some very fine splines in there that engage with the erector inside the turret. And as I suspected, there is a healthy O-ring both here and on the inside. That's going to help keep out any moisture or elements if you need to make this adjustment in bad weather. Make sure I get that lined up. There we go. Those are very fine splines in there, so you will want to be careful that you don't mash them because they are brass and not steel. The same is true of this little screw. It is a fine thread. You don't want to be too aggressive with it, because you are threading a steel screw into a brass thread, and you don't want to strip it out or cross thread it when you're doing it. That being said, it's a pretty nice dial. I don't know if there's much more to say about it, and I'm going to go ahead and put this cap on, and we will call it a day here at the bench. We'll go ahead and head outside and start looking at some more interesting targets. So the first thing I want to look at out here in the field is going to be our eye chart, and we are currently at 50 yards, and I have the magnification set at 3 power. And you can see how fine that reticle is going to be if you were using this at the low end. The 3, 6, and 9 stadia do a pretty good job of drawing your attention to the middle of the field of view, but if you needed to look at something very small and line it up with the exact center, it's going to be a bit of a challenge. If you were doing coarse aiming at larger targets, you're going to be just fine. Let's go ahead and go up through our magnification range. Right there is 5 power, and you see how much more of that actual fine reticle you can see with even just that a little bit of increase in magnification. And then by the time we get up here to 10 power, the whole thing is going to be pretty much usable. You can see the grid lines, or excuse me, the grid dots and our drop numbers in the MOA, as well as the finer hash marks going out to the left and right on your horizontal stadia. Then we get up here to 15 power, and we had really very little loss of brightness, which is good to see. The scope's doing a good job of gathering that light and ushering it on through the glass into your eye. And here at 50 yards, we can make out all 4 lines of the letters and all 3 lines of our numbers. And the color representation over there on the right side of the chart looks terrific. The surprised chicken is clearly surprised. I'm going to adjust our center just a little bit over here to these cards, just to see how well this does on some of those finer elements. So if you were trying to aim at something very small, you can see that our MOA grid, this is not a mill grid, our MOA grid those little dots aren't going to obstruct anything. I mean, they're absolutely tiny and going to be usable no matter how small of a target you're really going to be aiming at. And that also moves it out of the way where we can make out our bullet holes, which are 6.5 Creedmoor, and our bullseyes. The last thing to point out is just how true the black is of the diamond and box and the heavier large H, G, and E on our letter chart. Very little purple discoloration to those letters. So that means that glass is not causing a tremendous amount of chromatic aberration, which is always a nice thing. Don't know what else we really need to look at this distance. I think we'll go ahead and take it on out to 100 yards and see how it looks at that distance. We'll point out, if you look at where that sun is glaring off of the wheel arch of the pilot, not a whole bunch of flare coming off of that, so it's controlling that as well. And that is direct sunlight right behind us shining off of the car, and we're not getting too much glare off of that, or the wheels themselves, which it's also shining on. So that's all good news. Like I said, we'll move out to 100 yards, we'll take another look at this and see how it performs. I have us repositioned to 100 yards and have our magnification back down at the minimum 3 power, and we are presented with a very nice image as before. I'm going to go ahead and bring us up through our power range. There's 5. There's 10. I'll just adjust this brightness a little bit. And 15. And as before, we have, I'm sure I got everything set here with the parallax, looks good. Just fiddle with it and see if I can make it any better. Maybe just a touch better there. We're not able to make out that bottom row of letters at 15 power, and some of the details in our playing cards have definitely become a little too small to make out. But our color representation and our bullet holes for the 6.5 Creedmoor on our bullseyes is still good. The reticle itself is not blocking a tremendous amount of our overall image. I'm going to go ahead and move this up just a little bit so that we can get a better idea of the grid, what it's going to look like on a target like this. And those small windage and elevation holds are visible and definitely usable, but they are not going to be an obstruction even on very small targets. If you were using this to do holds on something like a 22 or something, you know, with a lot of drop even at 100 yards, where you needed to be able to look for splash and then correct immediately, those dots are not going to be hindering you in any way. So what I'm going to do is pan back out, or excuse me, zoom back out. I'm going to pan left and right a little bit just to give us an idea how this image is going to look if you were just using it for scanning, which maybe 3 power is a little low, but it is the minimum on this one, so we're going to use it. I'm going to come over here to our building, which is going to be right here at the front. It's going to be at about 25 yards, 28 yards, something like that. And you can see how the individual boards don't really bow or flex as they go in and out of our field of view. So I'm going to stop right here on our words, and I'm going to zoom in so we can see how the fisheye, if there's any, is going to affect the image at maximum power at this short of a distance. Alright, I'll just watch those vertical boards and see how they look. Yeah, looking pretty good. Now the scope does not have any illumination, so that's what it would look like against a darker shadowed background. Pan across here quicker. Get back over here to our target. I'm going to go up here in the grass just a little bit so we can kind of get an idea of how sensitive that parallax is going to be. There it is, set for the eye chart. Even stuff behind it's looking pretty good. This one has a pretty coarse adjustment between 100 and 200 yards. And above 200, as we'll see later, it's very coarse. You're not going to have a tremendous amount of very fine adjustment. But overall, our depth of field there, between 100 and about 140 yards, looks fine. I think that is all we really need to look at here, this eye chart, and we will go ahead and go out to the floodplain and look at our buildings at longer distances. So we are once again out here in the floodplain to take a look at some signs and some buildings. We're going to start here with our rules and regulation signs at 310 yards. Scope is currently at 3 power magnification. I'm going to go ahead and zoom us up. Take a moment to stop here at 10 power. You are going to see me fiddling with this rear objective more than usual, simply because there seems to be a slight mismatch in the focal point when you're at 3x versus 15x, and I have to do slightly less than a quarter turn on that objective to compensate for that difference. But anyway, this is 10 power. Go ahead and bring it up to 15. Again, make that little adjustment just so that everything is nice and sharp. You can see that our rules and regulations signs, that's a little bit of a tongue twister today, are looking nice and sharp. Chromatic aberration is fairly minimal on those signs that are being lit by the sun, as well as the top of the green line of crops where it meets the white gravel. There might be just a slight touch of fringe, but not too bad at all. And I'm going to go ahead and adjust our point of aim up slightly, because at this distance, if you were holding over and had chose not to dial, you would be something around there at the 4 line, the 4 MOA line, I mean. That would be the approximate hold for a lot of common center fire cartridges. And with the crosshair out of the way, we can make out most of the words on those signs. The one all the way over there on the right, obviously that font is a little too small. And for reference, those individual sheets are going to be 12 by 16 inches. And just check the parallax. Yep, make sure the parallax is good. And take a look at our depth of field. Everything is looking pretty good from the gravel out, which is going to be anywhere from about 250 yards out to those trees on the berm behind the signs are going to be in the 350 to 360 yard range. As a matter of fact, I don't know why I'm guessing. I have my rangefinder. 380. So the trees directly above the signs are at 380 yards. But anyway, there aren't any cars out here to look at today, so we're not going to dawdle here at the signs. I'm going to go ahead and move on to our buildings. I'm going to pan us, or zoom us back out. And correct this focus so we have a nice image as we're panning across. And then we're going to go ahead and start moving to our left. Just keep an eye on that power line at the top that's just in view, and these power poles that are standing vertically, and just see if we can spot any fisheye think for the most part this thing does extremely well down here at the 3 power. We will check it at higher magnification when we go back the other way in a minute. We get it settled on our transformers. Then again, we're going to go up through our power range. There's 10. And finally 15. And I shouldn't have to adjust that parallax. That's going to be pretty good. The difference between 310 yards and 315 yards is basically indistinguishable on that dial. As you may recall, there's only about a 10-degree throw between 200 and 500 yards. So we're going to just see how we can do without having to adjust that too much today. And on our on our transformer, we can make out our red 75. And then down there on the lower right, at the 4 or 5 o'clock position, we're going to see quite a bit of detail in that silver pipe where the hail damage is. And for reference, the power pole to the left of our field of view, we get you a range, is at 289 yards, and it's looking pretty sharp as well. And as before, if you were using this without dialing, we'd be up here maybe just a little below our number 4. So I'm going to bring that up closer to the top there, just so we can try to see some contrast of those dots on the individual transformers, because they kind of get lost in the green foliage down there below the transformers. You can see that those dots are much more difficult to make out because of how fine they are and how low contrast they have against that dark green plant. But if we're looking for the details on our power pole, we can make out our individual transformers on top of the individual insulators on top of our transformers, as well as the hardware up there on the crossbars. We can make out quite a bit of detail with our 15 power magnification here. And we'll go ahead, move us down and look more closely at the brick building now. You can see a lot more of that Christmas tree dot matrix is visible when we're looking at the building, because it is a larger white, pale colored brick, and we get better contrast with our dots. But in that building, we can make out all the individual grout lines. We can see the power lines coming off the building, even though their connector on the building is obstructed by the tree. You can see those wires coming out to our power pole, and we can make out even the individual little bolt heads on the framework that holds the building up. And once again, chromatic aberration, while not completely absent, is fairly minimal down there where the light metal of the frame is contrasted against the shadows underneath the building. We don't have an unreasonable amount of purple fringing. Overall, here at 325 or 335? Let's look. 330. So 330 yards, we're doing just fine. We're going to go ahead now and zoom it on back out. We want that full field of view as we're painting across here. Again, just kind of tracking those power lines that we can still make out even at 3 power. Just the depth of field here at the 3X is extremely nice. And then we get over here to our next building. Let's center up on the building itself to start with. Go ahead and zoom us in. There's 10 power. Obviously we're starting to make out quite a bit more detail. And then we get to 15. I'm going to do a little work on this brightness real quick. Alright, so I've touched up that brightness so that we get a nice detailed image. Okay, I'm going to change this parallax just a touch. Again, that takes just ever so slight amount of adjustment. You see how much improvement that made in our image. And to give you some distances so that we have an idea of where we're looking at, the brown power pole there in front of the building
It's at 355 yards. The building is at 558 yards. And the tree line behind it is roughly 600 yards, depending on you're on the right side or the left side. It's a slight difference. But now that we have that established, let's see what we can see. The grout lines in our brick still very clear. Now that we have a full picture of this building and not partially obstructed by the tree, we can make out the rungs on the steps over there on the shadowy side of the building. We'll take a little closer look at that in a minute. We can make out our power antenna up there on top and its little horizontal receiver. Those little extra fine small antenna prongs sticking off of that horizontal bar. We have a nice contrast with our red vent. And then we can also see the fan exhaust over there on the left side of the building where it's got those little slats. You can make out those individual slats. You'll have to determine on your screen if you can see the bolt heads. I'm not 100% sure that you will be able to. I cannot see them here on my phone screen. But that being said, the image does look extremely nice. And I'm going to move us over here just to take a little bit closer look, center up on our transformers, just so we can have an idea of what kind of obstruction our reticle is going to make at that distance. Because remember, those transformers are approximately the same size as a silhouette target. They're a little skinnier, but the height is about right. And we can still see our individual soda can size insulators on top of the transformer. The hardware up on the crossbar is a little bit tougher to make out. Not quite as much detail as we were seeing at the 300 yards. But other than that, we still have a very good image. If you were taking shots at silhouette or maybe 16, 18-inch gongs at that distance, you would have absolutely no trouble dialing that distance and taking your shots. I'm going to move us up here because at that distance we would be at about 12 MOA. Which I'm going to be right about in there. So you can see how fine those dots still are even out there at that distance, but also how difficult they can be to make out on that low contrast trees and stuff in the background. Now let's go down here and look at our building and our stairs. Now pay attention as we pan across the face of this, the bricks. You can see how much more, jiggling it around, how much more of those fine dots you can make out when you have good contrast. And we'll go down here. I just want to see the difference between the rungs that are in the sun and the rungs that are in the shade, and see that the chromatic aberration is actually pretty much identical whether it's in the sun or in the shade, and how much of the detail we can make out in the grass and in the tree line behind the building. All of which is really presenting us with a very nice image. But now I'm going to go ahead and zoom us out to about half the magnification. So we're going to do, say, 8 power, right about there. And I'm going to touch up that rear focus again, so that as we pan back across, we can kind of get a better idea of the fisheye that we might expect with this scope. So we want to watch these power poles as they go off the edge and see if we see any real flexing in them, which we do not. They stay pretty straight. Here we are back at our 325 yard building. We have a closer power pole there. Even that one stays nice and straight as it comes into and out of our field of view. Might be just a tiny little bit at the very edge. And that's our last one. And we have returned to our rules and regulations. I'm zooming that out. Yeah, overall I'm pretty happy with that. I also want to point out just how little of the bezel you can see out here in the real world. And with your naked eye, you can actually get it to be even slightly less than that. It's one of my favorite things about this scope, just pointing that out. I love how thin that bezel is, and it doesn't take up much of your field of view at all. But anyway, I'm going to go ahead and change our locations, and we're going to look at some stuff beyond 1,000 yards. So I have us out here to look at our buildings that are well beyond 1,000 yards. We will come back to this one that we see here in the center. It is at 1,425 yards. But we're going to start with this one that's a little more shadowed, which is at 890 yards. I think I have that where I want it. And starting from 3 power, we're going to go ahead and zoom in. I am going to talk a little louder just to try to speak over some of this noise we have in the background. And then even though this is on the shadowed side of the building, we're still able to make out quite a bit of detail on those handrails, and we can make out the elements of our scaffolding. We can see our antenna on top of the building, as well as make out the reddish color of our heat vent on the very roof. And we do see a little bit more chromatic aberration there on the shiny metal pipe there, just to the right edge where the sun is shining on it directly. But one interesting thing to note is the sun shining off of all of those individual power lines. Unfortunately today we are blessed with very low mirage, so we can actually make out those individual power lines really well, and those range anywhere from right here in front of us at about 250 yards all the way out to that building that is at 900 yards. So really looking pretty good. What I am going to do before I move on is I am going to dial in approximately 32 MOA. You're going to see this, because if you were shooting out at these distances beyond 900 yards, you would not be using the center of the crosshair unless you had dialed in quite a bit of adjustment. So then I'm going to go ahead and bring us back up. You can see that our image still looks very nice. I did not have to adjust the position of the scope to stay inside the clear exit pupil, which is good. So that would be in the neighborhood of about 10 mils for those of you guys who work in mils. But I'm going to stay zoomed in as I pan to the left to our next building. Here's our final building for the day at 1,420 yards. I am going to bring us down just a little bit again to get those transformers covered up by at least part of the crosshair so that we can see what sort of obstruction that reticle is going to have at that distance. I have gone ahead and made a few adjustments to try to get that image to look as clear and true as it does with the naked eye, and I think I've got it as good as it's going to get. And while I don't think we can see the individual bricks and the grout lines here through this phone, I can tell you that with the naked eye, if you have it focused right and the parallax right, you can discern that it is made out of bricks. You can see the little bits of grout line and the different contrast between the grout and the bricks themselves. Though obviously it would be unlikely to pick out individual bricks, you are able to determine what that building is made out of. And with a nice contrast between the shadowed side of the building there on the left and our lighted side of the building here on the right, we really get a good idea of how this scope is going to handle those different lighting levels, as well as able to see out there on those transformers just to the right at about the 18 to 20 MOA on our 3 o'clock stadia. Those lines are still not going to be obstructing a silhouette sized target to a degree where you would not be able to dial and hold for wind. And overall, just gonna look at this for a minute and see what our depth of field looks like, because I have parallax adjusted just about halfway between 500 and infinity. I have to say that those crops that are there at the bottom of our field of view at about 350 yards, the ones that are there kind of darker green at about 8 o'clock on the left edge, those are going to be at about 500 yards, more or less. And then the building is again at 1420. There's just nothing to really complain about in that image. We are starting to see some chromatic aberration, you know, blurring out some of that stuff at that distance, but realistically, you know, that is still a totally usable image. I don't know that I have a whole lot more to say than what you all can see with your naked eyes. I think I'll leave it there and take it on back to the bench and wrap this thing up.
So I've got us back here at the bench to give you my final thoughts on this and wrap this up. I know the video is already getting a little long, probably going to be right at an hour. So I have made some notes to keep myself on task and not get sidetracked. And I'm going to start with the pros, and then we'll move to the cons after that. And the major pros that I have about this scope have to do with the image sharpness, the flatness of the image, and the other overall color and contrast that we see through the scope. And for a scope that's going to generally run you about 350 bucks, you know, on sale most of the time, and I don't really ever recall seeing it over like $399, just everyday price. The image is really good. It remained flat and sharp across the entire magnification range as long as we were adjusting our focus, which I will get to when I get to the cons. I really didn't have any complaints about the issue or complaints about the quality of the image that we were able to see through this scope. So that's going to be my chief pro, and probably the most important thing about any scope is, can you look through it and actually see stuff well? The next thing that I like is going to be the turrets. I like the ease of the use. I'm a fan of a capped windage turret because I almost never use it. I like the parallax adjustment over here, even though it is pretty coarse at the very top end. It didn't really prove to be a problem just because the depth of field on the scope was extremely good. I'm a fan of the zero stop in here just because of how simple it is to use with that little ring that you just drop in there, spin it till it stops, and then put your cap back on and you're set and good to go. The 47 MOA restriction that it has doesn't really come as a hindrance for the shooting that I do. I ran some basic numbers through Strelok for the rifles that I would put this on, which is like on an AR platform, something like that, running 77 grains in 5.56. The 47 MOA would get me out to 1,000 yards, actually just a little hair over 1,000 yards, with a muzzle velocity of 2,875 feet per second. And now that's out of an 18-inch barrel. Then the 6.5 Creedmoor on an 18-inch gun, running 140 grains and having 2,600 feet per second. The 47 MOA is almost exactly 1,175 yards. So that wouldn't get us all the way out to that most distant building that we were seeing out there, just over 1,400. But it'd get us, you know, past 1,000 yards, almost 1,200. And even if it was at 1,200 yards, you could just hold over a little bit and you'd be good to go. And then the last thing, and the thing that I actually used this on the most while I was testing it, was my 22, which I shoot 40 grain CCI target, which gets me about 1,050 feet per second. And that turret with the zero stopping installed is going to get me out to 325 yards. Now, I never personally shoot 22 out to 325 yards. I have shot it to 300 yards one time just for fun. So it would do 300 yards, but that's getting real far out there for a 22. So anybody that's shooting 22 beyond 300 yards and you want to have a zero stop, maybe that's not the scope for you. But anyway, that's just my personal preference. I like these turrets. I like the way they're set up. I didn't find them as any sort of a restriction for the uses that I would have. The other thing, the reticle. I like how detailed it is. I like how fine the lines are and the dots are, even though at times against darker backgrounds they can be difficult to see. For the target shooting and stuff that I was doing, it worked great. I was able to measure things. I was able to confirm distance based on measurement. I did a little bit of practice with that. It worked just fine because those hash marks seem to be true to what they're supposed to be. But one caveat to that is that below about 6 power, that reticle gets real fine and is not particularly useful. And I will come back to that in the cons when I get to it. I do like that it comes with a throw lever. I don't know why any scope of this magnification range or any scope higher than this would not come with a throw lever. That's the Viper PST comes without one of these, even though it's basically the exact same one that you can buy. I think especially in a scope that expensive, it should come with it. If a scope for $350 can come with a throw lever, I don't see why any of the other Vortex lineup don't. And I like this throw lever. It's just the right size for me. I like the fact that it's tensioned on and I can set it wherever I want. So like when I was putting this on a bolt gun, I could move it so that it was up here out of the way and I could clear my bolt. If it was an included one or the integrated one where it was just wherever it was going to be, there are times when those bolt handles on bolt guns can interfere and whack your throw lever, which is always an issue because you got to get the gun to run. Oh yeah, the image stability when we dialed. I mean, when we dialed on 32 MOA out there to look at the long distance stuff, we saw no degradation of the image quality. We didn't see any shadows coming in at the edges. We didn't see any sort of warping of the image towards the edges. I mean, it stayed completely flat and completely clear and sharp, as the same as when we had it dialed for its 100-yard zero. So for me, that's a big benefit because if you are going to dial, you don't want your image to go to crap when you do it. And that covers the pros that I like about the scope. So I'm going to quickly go over the cons. The chief one among those is going to be that issue we saw with the focus. You can see on here just a little bit, I have 2 marks. This is for the high end of the power range. This is for the low end of the power range. So that it's about 1/8 of a rotation is the entire difference between it being in focus at 3x and then it being in focus at 15x. And then you can kind of split the differences throughout the magnification range where you would need to be, like say you were at 8 power or 12 power and then 15 power. You can make that fine tweak. I personally had left it set for the maximum, and then whenever I had it down at the lower end, just your eye's natural ability to focus compensated for it. I never really noticed it, but we did see it on the camera there because the camera has a fixed focus and any deviation from that focus is going to become very apparent. So I didn't really notice it with the naked eye, but I can't say that it wasn't there because we saw it on camera. And I don't know if that's just mine, sample set of 1, or if that's just an issue with this scope in general. I suppose when I get the 5 to 25 version of this at some point, we'll see if it repeats itself on that scope. But in this case, that was the big con that I saw in this scope, was just that you do have to adjust this rear eyepiece a little bit to maintain a perfect focus. Oh yeah, the reticle fineness. Below 5 power, you basically have a duplex reticle because those hash marks and those dots are just way too small to see. So if you like to use your gun and your scope at low power for just like quick point shooting, this probably isn't the right scope for that. You want something with a bolder, more obvious reticle that's going to be just as useful at low power as it is at the maximum power. And this one below that 5 power, it's not as great. It's too fine. So keep that in mind when you're thinking about what you're going to be using your rifle for. And if you need that bottom end to be quick and visible, this might not be for you. What else? No illumination. For people who want illumination or who need illumination depending on their uses, it doesn't have it. There's not a version that does. So if you need illumination, you can basically just pass on by this one because it's not going to have it. And then the last thing is the weight. I know it's not particularly chunky and overweight for scopes of this magnification range nowadays, but I think that most of the scopes that we get nowadays are a little portly. I wish it was closer to that 21, maybe 22 ounces instead of the 27 that it's at, but you know, that's just a nitpick of mine. I always wanted a little bit lighter just so you don't have to carry the weight around, and it doesn't make the gun as top heavy. You can get lighter weight rings. I did not get lightweight rings. These are the ones that I was using it. These CV Life ones. They're not particularly lightweight rings, so that was kind of adding on to it. But that's just, you know, something that I noticed was that the gun was felt a little bit top heavy with the scope of this weight sitting on top of it. So then we're gonna move on to the last thing. Who do I think this is for? I think it's a great scope for rimfire shooters that are gonna be shooting during the day on highly visible targets that are well contrasted, because it has such a fine degree of finesse in this parallax where you can really just get your targets dialed in super sharp. I was able to pick out 22 caliber bullet holes on all the targets I was shooting, which were just, you know, white IPSC targets. I had no problem between 15 yards and 100 yards picking out those bullet holes. So it really does do a great job in the image sharpness, like I was saying before. The other people I think this would be good for is people who are going to be hunting and consistently taking shots beyond 100 yards. Inside of 100 yards, like I said, I think if you're going to be kind of stalking type hunting where you need to be at the lower magnification range to maintain your field of view, that reticle is really not ideal for that. But if you're going to be setting up in a position and taking shots out at 100, 200, 300 yards where you're going to be above 10 power the vast majority of the time, then that reticle is great, because it just gives you so much detail and your ability to hold for wind, whether after dialing or just down there in the Christmas tree. There's just a bunch of ways to use that reticle that are going to be convenient for those longer distance shots. I think that's really all I really have. It's all the notes I have anyway. And I'd just like to say thank you to everyone who made it this far. Please hit the old like button, click that subscribe button, and I do enjoy seeing the comments. So if you have anything to say about this scope, or, you know, something maybe that I overlooked, throw it down there. I'd be happy to see it and respond to it and have a little discussion. And with that, I will close this out and send you guys on your way, and hope to see you in the next video.